An Australian tax office employee who blew the whistle on the organisation is facing 161 years in prison. Richard Boyle's hearing is scheduled for March 1, and it's possible that he'll end up with a jail term comparable with serial killer Ivan Milat. So what's going on here?
Yeah, for tonight's Taking Stock, we're joined by Shane Oliver, Chief Economist and Head of Investment Strategy at AMP Capital, and Napoleon Purtis, founder of the cosmetics empire of the same name. Gentlemen, good evening to you both. Thanks so much for being here with us. Shane, would you like to kick us off on this one? It sounds disproportionately unfair in relation to, you know, taping people that want to be taped.
I think it's odd in a way because often when there's white-collar crimes, the argument is that the penalties are not as severe compared to more serious crimes, whereas this one does seem to go over the top. You can make an argument, though, that it's just the adding up of all the offences that he's been charged with, and that's where you get the disproportionate amount in terms of prison time. But I would suspect, I mean, I don't really know a lot about this case. I do think, though, if you break the law by doing certain things that are, well, you break the law, then obviously you will face a penalty, and that seems to be the issue in relation to this case. Hopefully the judge will take account of other extenuating circumstances which could reduce the sentence, but I think at the end of the day it's one for the courts to work out.
Even if it is a fraction of that 161 years, though, Napoleon, surely that sends a pretty strong message to anyone out there who's thinking of becoming a whistleblower, right? What do you think?
Look, I think that we have a rule of law in Australia, and I think that the ATO has public policy commitments, and those things just exist and are. And I think in this process we kind of are trying to assume things before everything takes place, and we have a justice system and a rule of law that will allow for things to be balanced and to be brought into where they need to be. I can't really comment much more than that because I just believe in justice, number one. I believe that the ATO has an obligation for public policy, and I think that there is a rule of law, and I think it's really that simple.
To Shane's point before about white-collar crime and how we perceive it in Australia in terms of the severity of some of the penalties, what do you think about that? Do you think that we come down too hard or not hard enough on white-collar criminals?
You know, I think everything is so individual, you know, and I think everything is just depending on the facts of that particular situation. Like, it depends on what we classify as white-collar and what we classify... I mean, obviously, I think the severity of murder has, you know, a lot in my sort of rule book is much worse. You know, no one deserves, you know, to have their life taken away other than by God or the greater power. So to sort of say we're not severe or we are severe, I don't really, you know, I don't really know the individual sort of cases, and I think that I can't think of one that I kind of go, they weren't severe enough there or they were severe enough there, and I think the public sort of feels that as well. I think generally I have a trust, having lived in 3 continents, I have a trust that in Australia we actually have a really good justice system.
When it comes to whistleblowing, though, you would say a lot of it is intention, isn't it? I mean, his intentions were good. It was to expose an ugly culture and corruption, and so that's quite different from something where you've taken somebody's life deliberately. I guess that's where we're kind of questioning the severity of the penalties attached to it.
I think, bear in mind, there are offences, there are penalties for tapping phone conversations and illegally taking documents away. And obviously, if you're... I don't think the Australian courts and Australian public would want whistleblowers to be breaking the law in the process of doing their whistleblowing. So that's why there's a bit of debate around this particular issue. Obviously that debate will rage on, but I do think ultimately it will be an issue for the courts to decide. We do want to encourage whistleblowers, but by the same token, we don't necessarily want them to, well, we don't want them to break the law in the process. I mean, that's going to defeat the whole point of having a rule of law in the country.
I mean, I feel that at the end of the day, the society generally has to decide on what they want. Do they want, you know, more of a control, you know, more centralised government, or do they not? And you know, every time we have votes, we have a choice around that, and we can decide with policy. So, you know, in this particular case, I think that, as I said, justice will prevail, and then we have a court system that's actually second to none, and I really believe in it.
Don't forget, if the police want to do things like tap people's phones or check your property. They have to get warrants and all those sorts of things. So they have to go through a due process to do all that sort of stuff.
It's a difficult topic. I feel like we've navigated our way through it quite well. We should pat ourselves on the back.
It's a touchy one.
So moving along, the Telecommunications Ombudsman is pushing for changes that would see telcos assess the financial circumstances of their customers before signing them up to big contracts. So how do we feel about this? More red tape? Is that all this is? Or is this a much needed change? Napoleon, what do you think?
I'm going to go really left of centre with this one.
Oh, good.
You know, I want telco companies to give new users a free period, a free time period, you know, and then they can make assessments, because in that free time period they can kind of really assess as to what type of customer they're bringing on. So whether you kind of go through all this red tape or bring it out further, or just give some free time, you know, make it a substantial free time, encourage the customer to take advantage of the service that you have and whether it is of superior, you know, quality, and then actually do your checks and go from there. So I'm kind of one of those ones, gift with purchase, you know, before any purchase, give the gift, you know, or a bonus with purchase, but without kind of having the commitment to kind of have to stay with it and lock you in and all that. And I say that because with my children, you know, I kind of feel like before I signed up, it would have been good to actually been able to sort of see what they were going to rake up, what they were going to do. Then you've got to go back and adjust it, and they get really angry. And they're like, you know, why are you taking away my kind of ability to sort of have extra time and, you know, do all this? Well, because it's actually really expensive, you know, and when I don't want you spending that much time on the phone and a whole heap of things. So I kind of feel that we're in this sort of period where they're making an enormous amount of money in this industry and in this area. So why not just give a free service for a good period of time and then assess things, you know, from there?
But that's a cooling off period. Yeah, so you sign up and then you've got a month to decide whether you can actually make those...
But longer.
Payments.
6 months.
Yeah, you've got to be a little bit careful here, because if we come down... I saw somewhere in the article that it says, seller beware. If we come down too hard on the sellers, then they'll stop selling things. If telcos have to do these sorts of checks, then what about other forms, credit card companies? Well, they probably have to anyway, but or retailers generally. You know, does someone actually need that product? Is it good for them? How far are we going to push down this line to the point where there's no liability, there's no responsibility on the part of the buyer?
So in cosmetics, we do sampling and we do gifted purchasing. So and people have the ability to come back for samples and do even like 3 and up to 6 months of sampling, and then they buy. So I kind of think of it in that way. I kind of agree with you that there's kind of like got to be a balance, but at the end of the day, I also like the idea of sampling, you know, the product and working it. We do it in cosmetics and we have to fund it. So why can't the telcos?
Is it fair to say, Shane, that we have a debt problem in Australia that extends from the top with mortgages right down into things like our phones?
Yeah, we have a massive debt problem. Most of it is mortgages. The giant bulk of it is in mortgages. And when you look at personal debt beyond mortgages, it's actually been in decline over the years. And maybe people have got more savvy with their credit cards. I know my level of credit card debt has gone up, but I always pay it off by the due date. But what I have discovered is that I'm getting free credit. The more I put on my credit card, and every expense, I mean, actually makes sense to do that, because you're getting free credit for up to 6 weeks, and you're getting points if you've got a decent credit card there. So it makes sense. So therefore, you could argue my balance has probably gone up. But in the great scheme of things, I'm actually paying it off by the due date, but the average balance is relatively high. But anyway, a lot of people don't understand that sort of stuff. But I do think, yes, we do have a problem with too much debt in Australia. This issue tangentially relates to that, because obviously in paying the telco bill, it's often deducted from people's credit cards and leads to extra credit card debt. So that's another debate in itself. It's quite clear that lenders should be responsible in the sort of lending they're making, but the telco company is not the one necessarily, I think in very rare circumstance, it's not the one providing the loans, the credit.
There's one more story that we really wanted to talk to you guys about. We haven't got that much time left, but this entire staff of a fast food restaurant in the US, which is a part of a major chain, they've quit all at the same time due to terrible management, they say. Their complaints include cutting pay from minimum wage to $4 an hour plus tips. And there's the note that we can see that was left on the window there.
A few expletives that we've blinded out for you there.
Napoleon, what do you think when you see something like this? A whole chain just up and walking out. Consumers, I mean, what are we all supposed to make of this?
What would your product be without good staff?
Well, it wouldn't be anything without good staff. Staff is everything. But having lived in America for 11 years, let me tell you that it doesn't surprise me, because there's this expectation, you know, with employers in America that people are going to work at such a low wage level, and they're going to have to go above and beyond, have to rely on tips. But if you're in a diner or a restaurant that doesn't actually have major tips because the price point's low anyway, you're not even able to kind of earn your minimum living. And then on top of that, if you don't have the sort of subclass, and I don't know why there's all this debate about people coming over the border in the USA, because ultimately it's run by Mexicans, all the service over in the United States and South America. So if you don't have all that, and then you've got to do all that, and you've got to serve, and you've got to do management, and you've got to be picked on, and you've got to be subservient, and you've got a customer that can drive you insane, without protection for the workers, that's kind of the other extreme. In Australia, we kind of have this really strong, you know, HR law system that kind of really protects the workforce, and some, you know, employers and employer groups believe that it's actually too hard on employers because they can't make the change, they need to be agile. But then you go to the US, where it's the other extreme, especially in states like Texas, which are right-to-work states, you know, and employers can basically do whatever they want, as opposed to California, that's more liberal and has a lot more protection for employees. You know, I'm not at all surprised. I kind of think that, you know, it's probably happening more than we even hear about it.
I think good on them. You know, these guys were getting ripped off. What, $4, $5 an hour? You've got to be joking.
Yeah.
My daughter, who's 20, I mean, just entering the workforce, just part-time, I mean, she's getting something like $20, and I think that's fair enough. But $4 or $5 an hour, that's just totally ridiculous. And I always thought they had a minimum wage for a purpose, to protect workers from being exploited by companies like this. And in the US, I know in some states their minimum wage is ridiculously low. I think it's about $18 or $17, $18 in Australia. In the US, it's down as low as $8, $10. But when you're paying $4 or $5, that's just totally ridiculous. So I think it's good to see workers saying, well, we've had enough of this. This is a total rip-off. We're not being treated fairly.
And it only works if they all go at once, doesn't it?
Yeah,
because that's the way to make a statement.
But it was an incredible story, and what a way for the staff to, you know, show the middle finger to the bosses a little bit there. We're out all at the same time. Hey, guys, thank you so much. Napoleon Purtis and Shane Oliver, really appreciate you having a chat with us tonight.